Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to game developers from all walks of life about their personal and professional journeys. I'm your host, Graham Waldrop. As always, our show is presented by Mudstack, the only asset management and collaboration tool custom built for game studios and digital artists. For more information, head over to mudstack.com. Cameron is living proof that dreams can actually come true. With a dash of serendipity and a whole lot of gumption, Cameron wound up working at the studio he always wanted to work at. But his path there wasn't easy. He endured a lot of struggle and strife, but never stopped pursuing his destiny, no matter what the circumstance was. I don't want to say anything else, really. I think the episode will speak for itself. Only thing I'll say is if you need some inspiration in your own life, no matter what's going on, you picked the perfect episode to listen to. Before we begin, I just want to point out we did have a couple of technical issues with this episode, but it's nothing earth-shattering. It's not going to ruin your listening experience, but I did want to give y'all a heads up about that. But content-wise, this is a truly fantastic episode. We hope you enjoy it. I'll see you after the show to wrap things up. Well, so Cameron, has games always been something you wanted to get into, or did you find that out a little later in life? When did you know, I got to try and get into this business?
Oh, man, super early. So I'm an only child, and early on.
Represent.
Yeah, so I imagine we might have similar experiences, but did you find that in childhood, you were seeking out friendships and trying to make as many friends as possible since you didn't have siblings to, hang out with?
Oh, it was weird. I always had a small group of friends, and I was kind of content with that. I was never one who wanted a sibling, because I kind of liked being a little bit of an isolationist, but not too much. So I was never really going out trying to make a ton of friends or anything, but it was always good to have some friends because, sometimes it can get a little lonely, even if you prefer to be kind of on your own sometimes. Yeah. So I can definitely relate to that.
Yeah. So I had a very similar experience. I have a lot of acquaintances, and I find myself, making a lot of friends, but I'm deeply drawn to having really interpersonal, deep connections, right? And so as a kid, video games was a shared interest with a lot of, kids that I was going to school with. As a child, especially in the early years of elementary school and middle school, I was bouncing around schools a lot because of parents moving schools and everything. And so video games were both kind of that shared connection that I could use to kind of break the ice and be like, hey, do you want to come over and play Mario Party? I know we just got to know each other, but let me steal your stars. Or, it was something that I could do when there wasn't a whole lot of friends around. And I could, really dive into a world and make friends virtually, either through online games or through, single player experiences. And it stuck with me.
Did you prefer single player or online?
A little bit of both. Kind of a hard choice there. I guess, gun to my head, I'd have to say that online experiences are absolutely the one I would choose. There's something magical about being able to go into a persistent world and organically meet other people who are just living a life alongside you.
Right. You have no idea who they really are, but, you guys are there for the shared experience.
There's no preconceptions, and it's just all about getting together and having fun doing the thing that you both are choosing to do in your free time.
Do you ever get into a clan or something, or guild or whatever game you played on, whatever games you played online?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of my first big online games was Final Fantasy XI, and that was back in the days of the early aughts, and that game was intentionally built around, you could get up to level 13 out of 75 by just doing whatever you want solo. And then you had to form relationships. You had to find groups. You had to go into the higher level zones that were absolutely deadly if you were going to try and tackle them solo. And then you'd sit in these camps that the community would figure out where the best places to set up are, and you would just find other people who are like-minded, who are hey, I'm here because I want to get into a group and do this content, and you would go out and you do that. And in that game they had link shells, which was their equivalent of guilds, and you could join any number of link shells, and so I joined quite a few of those. I was pretty young. I was like 11 to 15 whenever I was playing that game. So I wasn't the most social butterfly, nor did I have many like applicable opinions on the politics that people were talking about in those games. But I moved on from that to like World of Warcraft and joined a couple of pretty intimately connected guilds with like lots of friends that had known each other in real life. We got together, we raided. I was in some like really hardcore, got to get to the top of like our server kind of raid guilds. Communities are super fun to integrate with and be around.
Yeah, agreed. I kind of around the similar age, like what was it, Star Wars Battlefront 2 on PS2.
Yeah.
Dude, I got into a clan on that. I was in it for like 2 years. That was like all we did. It was like every day we're playing, or we're either playing other clans or we're practicing. It was like one summer in particular, I think it was summer of 05. It was just non-stop. Those are some of the most fun I've ever had playing games. So can totally relate to that big time.
Yeah, it offers a space that you can just, get together regardless of where you're at in your life, regardless of where you live. You can set just a time where everybody just sits down and pops on a headset and either gets on their computer or, gets on their console and just hang out and have fun together, play video games.
Did you ever get to like know people more than the game at all?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that was the cool part.
I made some lasting friendships. Like I had people that I considered like my best friends. People that I would say, if I get married, like they're going to be at my wedding.
Cool. Love that.
I've met people that I know did get married by the relationships that they found in these video games, and it's incredible. It's a link socially that I think is still fairly new, but is now like pretty heavily integrated into our culture. It's pretty great.
Yeah, I think it's being accepted more, and I think along with dating apps, like I got friends that are getting married, and not this weekend, but the next weekend, they met on Tinder. I know a bunch of people who have gotten together over Tinder or dating apps or games or whatever. I mean, it's really incredible how the internet is bringing us closer together, I think, as a society, even though I think also a lot of people would think it's driving us away. But I think it's just we're finding different ways to connect than we did before the internet, or when the internet was in its early days.
It's like being part of a fandom, you just share your love for a particular thing, and you can talk at hours on end around that, and hopefully that bleeds into like so who are you, right? What do you do? What part of the world do you live in? What's the life experience that you have? And you can really dive into getting to know people. And I feel like having that shared interest to kind of, like I said before, to kind of break the ice makes it a lot more likely for people who are playing a video game together to feel comfortable opening up to each other about the more personal parts of their life, the things that are outside the video game.
And it gets rid of the need for small talk, which I love because I hate small talk. So it's great to be like, all right, we all like this game, so we can clearly talk about that, and then that's going to make me more comfortable to maybe talk about other stuff. So
me too. My dad and some of my family that's of the older generation, anytime I talk to them, it's like struggling really hard to find anything like common interest to talk about. And I've been slowly but surely like getting them into, some of the pieces of media that I like. Now we have TV shows that we can talk about. We've got movies we can talk about. I'm hoping to one day break that barrier with a video game.
Yeah, and it must be, that's good that that's happening, but I bet initially when they're like, well, what do you, if they don't know what you do in depth, it's like, I'm sure that was kind of uncomfortable, right? A little bit to be like, I designed in Guild Wars 2. It's like, what the hell did you even say?
Yeah. Funny, talking about like how, when in my life did I feel that I wanted to get into games? Like I knew from a really early age, but when I was in my late teens, I made the decision. I'm like, you know what? This is what I love to do. This is what I would want to educate myself on how to actually perform this craft and make this art. And so I'm going to leave Jacksonville, Florida, and go across the United States. And I'm going to go to a city where, video game industry actually exists. And my whole family just kind of looked at me like I was just bonkers. No one really believed in the value of doing that. That was always it's kind of like saying, I'm going to go to Hollywood and be an actor, right? Like, you can, totally. You should, if that's your dream, 100% do it. It is cutthroat. It is going to be very difficult. There's going to be a lot of obstacles. And a lot of people who are very far removed from that culture see that as kind of like an unattainable, impossible, thing to do. And that's how they treated this. So, hey, proved them wrong, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So before you made the move, though, just to delve deeper into your childhood, I guess, a little bit, if games was sort of made it easier for you to make friends, whether it was online or with people that were in wherever you were living at the time, what was school like then? If that was kind of like your outlet, was school tough, or did you get along at school well with studying, or was it like, man, this is just not my bag?
Yeah, so that's a multifaceted subject. I'll try and navigate this as clearly as I can. First things first, my dad is actually a teacher, and he taught middle school science and middle school physical education. And so all the way up from elementary school to middle school, he really helped me to really be hungry for knowledge, be hungry for education, and to, even on the subjects that I didn't like math, which I love now, and I'll get into that later, but even on the things that I wasn't super excited about, to really try and push me to find the value of just learning and getting that knowledge, and then maybe one day hopefully applying it, right? Finding a dream before all of this stuff really solidified as the path that I wanted to walk. And it was pretty stable up through those grades. When I got into high school, though, some pretty difficult social things happened. Some pretty difficult familial events started to occur, and it made it very easy for me to kind of detach and to fall into these worlds, particularly World of Warcraft, and to kind of use them as a comfort zone, as a place to escape and to get out of the crazy bullshit that was going on in the real world. And I eventually got to the point where I didn't like going to school anymore. Again, there were some social issues that were going on. There were some familial problems that were popping up, and I didn't like being around a bunch of kids that, for better or for worse, were just kind of treating life as though it was just super easy in a game to be played. And then that's not their fault, right? They were kids at the time. So if anybody's watching this, I don't hold it against you. We were all 14, 15. But I ended up dropping out of school. And I just stopped going. I kind of dove into video games as kind of a way to try and get some form of social interaction and activity with people that I trusted, and to just kind of get me through some really dark periods where I was struggling with depression. I learned later that I had undiagnosed ADHD, which definitely did not help. And the way that a lot of subjects are taught in school just weren't interesting to me. I talk about math, right? Math was one of those things that just I kept balking at anytime the teachers were, presenting all right, now it's time to learn trigonometry and time to learn, advanced algebra and stuff like that.
Once we hit geometry, I was get the hell out of here. I'm done. I can't do this. What the hell does this even mean?
And, I honestly think a lot of it is because it's presented as here's a bunch of numbers and problems to solve without actual real world applications presented as to how you could use the skill set. Turns out math is awesome, and you can do some incredible art with it, and you can create some incredible video game content with it. And if it was just presented in some ways that was hey, here's some of the things that you have an interest in that if you learn this thing will help you, I totally would have attached to it more.
Yeah, I think that's one of the problems with school, at least when we were in school, is the lack of real world application to things like math. Hell, even sometimes things like like history, like relating maybe historical events to what we're going through now would be interesting. But it's like it's always presented in this very kind of like black and white. This is what it is. Forget about anything else. Don't think about anything else. It doesn't like open it up for you to think about anything else. And also just like, especially, you're talking about the ADHD. I don't know if I have ADD or ADHD, but my dad did. I probably have a touch of it or a lot of it. I'm not sure. But it's really hard to concentrate when you got 30 other kids around, and not having like sort of more individualized instruction, I think, is also was a problem for me. It's tough learning stuff that you just doesn't come naturally at that age. For me, it was like disaster.
Yeah, and I don't know if the part of the world that you grew up in had the same kind of cultural mentality to dropping out. But back home in Florida, like, it was kind of seen as a death sentence, right? Like, Cameron's a dropout. Cameron's only going to, be working, 9 to 5 jobs at like the local Targets or gas stations, and like really
his future's over.
Yeah, there's a limit to what he can do, and it's like, absolutely not. What are you talking about?
What was your parents' reaction, particularly your dad being an educator?
Oh, I know that he was very, very disappointed. It took a little bit. It took quite a few years to kind of convince him of the plan that I was formulating in the background. Because around the time that I had dropped out, it started to really spin the wheels in my head of like, okay, well, what am I going to do? Because my goal isn't to like just drop out and do nothing with my life. Like, I still want to do stuff. And I started, coming up with a plan of action, like what schools am I going to go to, what kind of cities do I might want to be in order to get into this industry. And I would talk to him a little bit about it every now and then, and he'd kind of, just take it and be like, we'll see. I really just wish you would get your education. And I understand, totally get it. If I was talking to a teenager at that point, like, I'd have a lot of the same concerns. But it took some time. I think with a big shift as that, it required kind of showing the proof in the pudding, and really just doing what I said I was going to do, which was very hard. It took a long time. But
so what did you do when you dropped out initially before you could actually, you're getting your plan together and everything? What did you do beyond games?
So I started to dive into, at that point, it was the early 2010s, and I dived into the internet in terms of like all of the educational resources that were available at the time. Not nearly as many well-structured and well-produced educational resources as we have today, but really just trying to find like anything that I could, YouTube videos of people talking about things, critiquing things, and surrounding myself with people who were like-minded and would really like dive into the details of the things that they loved. I was kind of a homebody for a little while. Like, I spent, nearly 3 years just kind of as a hermit in my home, just playing video games and sucked into screens and stuff. And every now and then I'd, get out, and like a friend from high school would be like, hey, I haven't seen you in a while. You want to go do a thing? And then we would. But largely it was just surround myself with as much of the thing that I loved as possible from as many different perspectives as possible, and just try and take in all of that information, assess things, practice like writing. At the time I thought, I'm going to write my own story, and maybe I'll turn that into a video game. And so just really trying to get as much practice into the craft as possible.
Did you try to make a game at all?
No. The like indie developer tools that were around at the time, I didn't know how to make them available. I was still learning to be like super technologically savvy. There's a small engine that Undertale was developed in. And I think I remember downloading that, or like an early version of that, something like that. Very basic, like 2D top-down platformer type of stuff. Didn't get very far because I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I wanted, well, that's not true. I did know what I wanted to do. I wanted to build like AAA experiences, like big stories with big set pieces and like flashy and exciting combat. And I knew I wanted to do something with online components to it. And so I wish, if I could go back in time and talk to 15-year-old me, I'd be like, download these things, start building super, super simple stuff, get the fundamentals down because you're going to need it. But 15-year-old me was like, I'm just going to skip right to the good part.
Yeah. Well, yeah, when you're at that age, it's kind of like you know where you want to end, but you don't know where to start.
Yeah, exactly. I will say Minecraft was like an incredible outlet for me. My friends were playing it, and they were like, hey, you're a really creative person. Have you tried playing Minecraft? It's like in beta at the moment. That's how long ago this was. And we jumped in, and like I was able to use that as an outlet for like just creating a bunch of things, learning a little bit more of like a mechanical engineer or a technical engineering type of like mindset. It's really good. I'm incredibly impressed with how far that game has come and how far it was, even back in the day.
Yeah, around that time, like Minecraft, Little Big Planet, all this sort of user-generated content, I think that was incredibly useful to people that wanted to get in the industry. You weren't building things in a traditional way, but you were building things, and you were stretching those creative muscles.
Yeah, it was simplified, but it was very much just like, do you have an idea of how you might be able to like create something with these parameters? Little Big Planet is a great example. I wish that I had a PlayStation console whenever I was that age. I didn't get that until I actually moved out and spent a year in Ohio. But then I got into Little Big Planet, and that was a lot of fun. All
right, so you get your plan together, I assume, and you make that announcement. I'm getting the hell out of Jacksonville. What's your plan? Where are you going?
That story has some interesting beginnings. So it was in 2012. I was 19, and Guild Wars 2 had just come out, and I had been a big player of Guild Wars 1. I jumped into the game as a kid in middle school and played through all the campaigns and met some good friends through there. And when the studio announced GW2 and they released a lot of their marketing videos for it, and they released the manifesto talking about like, here's how we're changing the world of MMOs. Here's how we're approaching content. Here's how we're approaching combat. All of that just like really spoke to me and excited me to really jump into this new age of online gaming. And so I did. And serendipitously, I met someone who I felt really strongly for. They felt strongly for me, and she was living up in Ohio at the time. And so I was like, well, I have nothing here in Florida. I'll move up there, and we'll see if this thing works. And so we did. I spent a year there, and it was good. I was able to break out of my like social shell that had built up over the last few years of kind of being isolated. Got a job and was able to make some friends and spend a lot more time like really connecting with people physically rather than just digitally. But at the same time, like we would, go back home and we'd play video games. We played Guild Wars 2, and we'd play eventually like Final Fantasy 14 came out, and it was a good time. But Ohio is Ohio, and there's not a whole lot of video game industry out there. So about 9 months into living in Ohio, I was like, you know what, I don't want to waste any time. I don't really see a future here for me. Let's move out to the West Coast. Let's go to Seattle, because I want to get into the video game industry, and like, man, I would love to work for ArenaNet on Guild Wars 2 one day. And that's where they're at. So what better way to have the chance and the opportunity than to put myself in the city where I'll have the chance and the opportunity. So we packed up and made like a 45-hour road trip and stopped in Salt Lake City for a little bit. It was a lot of fun. I had packed a 2003 Camry up to the ceiling. It was absolutely not legal to drive that thing across the United States.
You take care of those Japanese-made vehicles; they'll take care of you.
Yeah.
Like, the only cars I've owned are Hondas or Toyotas. They are fantastic. We are not associated in any way with Hondas or Toyotas, but for the record, they're awesome.
I agree. Honestly, Toyota's been great. But yeah, it was a wonderful journey, and it led me to kind of just settling down in the kind of the outskirts of the greater Seattle area, Because for those who don't know, there's Seattle, and then there's a bunch of other cities around the area. And we were in kind of one of the southern cities called Kent. And I got a job at Target and was just kind of like, all right, I'm here. I'm going to save up as much as I can. And there's a school, DigiPen, in the area that, I'll apply once I have enough funding to be able to, get in. And that was my new plan.
Yeah, that's really cool in terms of, that's like your own American Odyssey in a way, going to Ohio and then going to Seattle and all the things you experienced there. I mean, from what I could tell, it sounds like that Ohio experience was really instrumental in you sort of getting remotivated in a way, even though it sounded like you still stayed motivated, but being more social, being in a relationship, going about, getting a job, getting back out in the world a little bit, having a little more balance, it sounds like, was really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I was a hermit, 100%. And this really gave me the opportunity to just kind of come out of the chrysalis and really start to find who I am as an individual, especially being able to interact with people face to face and form a lot of really close bonds with people. It was, like you said, it was instrumental for me being able to take the next step.
So I feel like at that age too, like the way you say 19, like from like 19 to 23 or so, I feel like that's the time when you really start to figure out what the hell you're going to do or what you're going to try and do. You're going to take your chances. You're going to take your shots. It's a perfect age to do it. You're like old enough to know enough, but you still don't know shit kind of thing. But you're at a particular point in your life where you can actually go try and make something happen. It's not like a dream anymore. It's like, all right, let's go find the dream.
Yeah, 100%. There's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of opportunities. But yeah, it's very freeform. It's very much just like, let's really define who I am and what I want to do. I don't think that necessarily stops being a possibility, at any particular age.
No, not at all.
But it's definitely...
But you get older,
yeah,
right? More responsibilities, other things come into your life. But yeah, there's always a point to go adventuring and do something new and all that. But I think like the first time you do it is the sweetest.
Yeah, I would agree. I'll never forget that journey. It was a lot of fun.
And you really went across the damn country, too. That wasn't like a hop and skip over to Seattle. That was like the trek of a lifetime.
I got as far away from Jacksonville as I could on the continental U.S.
Yeah, I was about to say. A lot of distance between those two cities.
Yeah.
So you mentioned DigiPen. That's a school that you wanted to apply to?
Yeah, I had known about it, and I didn't really have any connections at the time. So I figured I'll just work. I'll put away some money in savings every month, and I'll save up for a tuition to be able to get in and to really start to learn from professionals and put myself into a position where I can start maybe growing those skill sets and then become a good, attractive candidate for a local Seattle area studio.
Was there any apprehension on the school's part because of the high school situation, or did that not matter?
I actually never ended up going to talk to the DigiPen folks. That was something that I was planning to do, I think around 6 to 8 months after moving out, is whenever I had mapped out that like that's how much I would need in order to really solidify, put down roots, and then take that next step. But before any of that happened, I had the most serendipitous interaction of them all, in that I was working at Target in the electronics section shortly after the PlayStation 4 launch, and the president of ArenaNet, Mike O'Brien, came walking down the aisle towards the electronics section, and I saw him, recognized him immediately, and like my whole body just went whoosh, like time freezes. You got all of these thoughts running through your head, like, how are you going to do this? You're starstruck. Like, is this the opportunity? Do you want to make this the moment that you go up to your idol and like talk to him about like, hey, I want to work for your company? And I did. I turned over to my colleague who was on the other register, and I was just like, hey, I will explain this later. I need you to hold down the fort. I got to go talk to somebody. And they were like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, I'll tell you later. And I just went off, right? And it was great. I kind of bumbled over my words a lot. And I just went up to him and said, like, are you Mike O'Brien? Because I think I know who you are, and I'm a huge fan. And that got us to talking a little bit about my experience with the game and his company and the beautiful artwork that is the Guild Wars franchise. And that led to one of my first interactions with him being me having to disappoint him because the PlayStation 4 having just come out, he was looking for a controller so that his kids could play Trine together on the PlayStation. And we didn't have any. And I tried my best. I like went into the back room. I was like shuffling through all of the different shelves, like trying to find, did someone like accidentally misstock one? Is it maybe over here in this section? No, the store didn't have any. The console had just come out. There were no controllers. And so I had to break the news to him that like, sorry, Mo, your kids cannot play co-op together tonight. But then afterwards, he invited me to come to the studio for a studio tour. And it was kind of an open invitation. There wasn't a specific time that he had given. He's just like, hey, when you get there, just let them know that you're there to see me. And it was like a dream come true. It's still kind of surreal talking about it today, nearly, 9 years later at this point? Jeez. Yeah, that was November of 2023, so we're almost 9 years ago now. I got to go to the studio, and I did the full studio tour. It was absolutely hilarious to me, walking up to the front desk and being like, I'm here to see Mike O'Brien, the president of the studio. And the woman behind the counter was just like, I'm going to make sure your story checks out. And made a couple of phone calls, went into the studio.
Where'd you guys meet? At Target? Where do you work? At Target. It's like, really? Okay. And you're here to see him. Got it. I can just imagine, the thoughts going through her head at the time, just like, is this some crazed super fan that's gonna like have some sort of needle to get some of his blood and like take it and sell it on the black market? Like, what kind of crazy things might happen? And it was incredible to see. She comes back, and Mike and a bunch of other of the studio leadership at the time kind of came out with him. They were in a big meeting about something. I don't even remember what it was at this point. They didn't tell me because I wasn't under NDA at the point in time. And I got a picture with them, and then the recruiting lead for the studio gave me the tour. And afterwards, I was like, how do I do something to get my foot in the door here? What do I do? Because I'm just a kid from the South, and I have dreams and aspirations of doing this thing, and I've got a small plan that I don't know if is going to work, and I might as well get your advice as someone who is the lead of getting people into the studio. What do I need to do? And that led to him giving me his card and saying, like, send me an email every week, even if I don't respond. I promise you're not pestering me. Just send an email every single week, and I will reach out to you when something happens and something opens up. And it took a few months of doing that, and there were times where I was like, this guy hates me. This guy thinks that I'm just like the most annoying person on the planet. He gets in on Monday morning, he sees my email, and he immediately sends it to his junk. No, nicest guy ever. Genuinely meant what he said, and eventually a position opened up, and boom. Wow. Yeah, that's beyond serendipitous. That's kind of unbelievable, because you're like, I'm moving to Seattle to go work, or to hopefully one day work for ArenaNet. You just happen to see the head of the studio. You happen, and then the thing that really amazes me is that everyone was so nice there.
Yeah.
Head of the studio, super nice. Recruiting guy, super nice. That says a lot about the culture there.
Yes, that was one of the things that like I felt in the videos, and then the interviews that I watched of that team, and what really initially drew me to wanting to work there was like, this feels like the kind of culture that I want to be a part of. Because I could have stayed in Florida and worked for like Tiburon, and
Sure.
done.
Yeah, the Madden developer, right?
Yeah, exactly. I could make football games, but I don't know if that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to make some massive online fantasy games, and here's a company that's doing it, a team that's doing that really seems to value personal health and relationships with each other, and like forming a feeling of true familial bond, and yeah, it was prevalent. They were incredibly welcoming. It was just wonderful.
Yeah, sounds like it. What was the position they offered?
So it was the entry level for QA. So at the time, QA was being moved to happen at a third-party QA firm, and so they reached out to me and they were like, "Hey, we're putting together this new QA team. Technically, they don't work for ArenaNet. They work for at the time it was Mobius, and but we think you might be a good fit. You want to come in for an interview?" And yeah, that's where I started, was being a third-party tester. And ArenaNet really treated that group as part of the studio, right? Like, you hear so often nowadays about third-party like testing studios being mistreated and not being included in credits, and not feeling like they're actually part of the team. And ArenaNet made a huge effort with Mobius to send representatives from the team over to the Mobius office to give some like project updates, to give presentations on our future objectives. When Heart of Thorns, our first expansion, was early in development, Colin Johansson, the game director at the time, came and actually presented the whole expansion to the testing group, and was like, "Hey, this is the thing that we're going to be building. We want your feedback. We want to hear what you have to say." And that's just like, it's kind of unheard of, and they would spend, not only would they come over for being able to just talk with us and present to us, but they would stay and they'd have lunch with us, and it really made us feel like we were not just numbers on a screen to them, or faceless names. And they even went as far as to like take some of their early like entry-level producers that they were training up. They would have them start by doing a week or two at the Mobius office, to get a sense of like, hey, here is what the testing environment feels like. Here is what the culture is like over here. This is your first taste, and then now we're going to pull you in-house, and here's all of the other things that are going on. So it was a really positive environment. That feeling of hospitality, of a really welcoming community, was pervasive through both how they treated each other in the studio, but also how they treated their third-party outsource firms. It was great. That's something you don't hear about, honestly, in the industry. And it's a good move. More studios should do that have third-party testing. I agree. It takes effort. It's hard, but It's so worth it. It's 100% worth it. Because then I'm sure you were like ready to run through a wall for somebody at that point. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So talk about when you actually got in there, and it's like first couple weeks. Like, are you kind of overwhelmed by anything, or are you just doing functional tests? Like, take me through a little bit of your routine then. The first big project that I was able to work on was we had a big update to the game in 2014 that added a bunch of like big quality of life features. Like, we introduced the wardrobe, and we also shipped in China around the same time. And so I kind of came in on releases that were very much like systems oriented and gameplay feature oriented, kind of changing the way that players really interact with the game on a day-to-day basis, and what kind of goals they were forming and rewards that they were chasing after. And so I was able to take the knowledge and the expertise I had as a player of the game, which again, I was just like super into GW2 as a player before jumping in as a tester, and get into these new developments, see them through the eyes of someone who, really loves the moment-to-moment experience and how it might affect that, give feedback on that stuff, and then just like poke at it and play it and think about, like, if this was live, what would I do to try and like min-max the system or to break these things in certain ways? How would I actually utilize this from my day-to-day experience? And there was a lot of training of learning like the industry terms, which this being my first industry job, like I didn't know what the terms around bug reports were. I didn't know what regression actually meant. I thought regression at first was like when a bug fails and things get worse. Because you're regressing, right? You're not progressing, you're regressing. It's like, no, it just means that you test it and make sure that it gets better.
What about like bug reports where you're like, I had to replicate the bug and all that stuff, like videos, images, was that also like that's what you need to do? That's how things get fixed.
That I feel like that part, not to sound smug or anything, but I feel like it came fairly naturally. The like active map out step by step what you were doing when you encountered this thing, or like find someone else's bug. Maybe you're regressing something that someone else wrote. Maybe they're not in the office that day or they need help, and just like go through the process of exactly step by step what's going to happen. But then also kind of branch out and halo test and figure out, if I do this, small little thing here, if I alter in this way, what happens then? That all very, very quickly clicked with me. And taking screenshots and attaching them, like we had a pretty sophisticated system at the time for making that very easy. And I've been a huge believer in visual aids. Because text can only get you so far, right? The cadence at which you're reading text is different from reader to reader, and the emphasis on different words might be different. You can have the clearest step-by-step repro steps, and it's
might not matter.
Exactly. There's still a possibility that it gets taken out of context.
At Mudstack now, we've been working with a lot of the developers here for. I worked with some of these guys for like 10 years, and like it really, our process of tracking bugs has evolved to the point where it's like, you gotta write down all the steps. You need an image. You gotta like make circles on the image or squares, or you have a video. Like you have to have a visual aid. If you do not have a visual aid, that shit just gets thrown right out the door. Which is fair to the developers because they're doing so much and they don't have time to try and interpret something.
One of the silliest things that I did early on was I was taking pictures of a couple of bugs that I wanted to be able to upload. And I was trying to figure out how I was going to upload them to a place where they could be easily seen. And this was before I really started to get into like just attaching them straight to the bugs in our bug software at the time. And I uploaded these screenshots of in-development bugs to Imager. And I had done that like a few times until one of my like coworkers looked over and was just like, "Is that Imager?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's a photo hosting website." He's like, "It's a public photo hosting website. Are you sure that these pictures should be there?" I was like, "Oh, no. And I thought that I was going to get fired, like leaking, in development content. I thought that that's how leaks actually happened, was someone made a mistake and, some eagle-eyed person like browsing Imager is like, "Oh, what's this?" and then sends it out. And that totally can happen, right? But man, it was terrifying. Learned very quickly.
How long were you testing before you started designing stuff?
So I was in the third-party QA team for about a year. And then I got brought on in-house to run the raids team from a QA perspective. And I did that for I'd say about a year and a few months, maybe a year and a half. And then I want to say it was August of 2015 is when the position opened up. I applied and I got the offer for coming on full-time as design. Before that actually happened, is around the the beginning of 2015 that I started to really dive into trying to learn the development tools on my own, because I knew I wanted to get into design. I knew that was my ultimate goal, and I wanted to be able to have an easy entry into the world of actually designing for the game, which meant I needed to be able to hit the ground running knowing the development tools. And luckily, I had a couple of great mentors that really taught me how to think really efficiently, how to reverse engineer things that had already been built, and discover how they were built, and then maybe apply those learnings to something that I'm building. And so Nate Johnson and Benjamin Arnold, shout out to them. They really helped to guide me in terms of the philosophy of learning these tools, and they were very patient and really they spent a lot of their free time helping to educate me in these tool sets so that I could build a representation of what I might do in the game. And funnily enough, that representation ended up taking form as a piece of dungeon content for the game that when I was brought on to design, the team was like, this is good. We're going to greenlight this to actually go through the full production process and ship. So, be ready to ship this pretty soon because it's pretty far along and we're going to finish it. And I was like, oh, okay. I guess that paid off then.
So how did you strike up that relationship with those mentors?
So for Nate, it was just very much about like going to some social gatherings where we had mutual friends, getting to know him by being introduced to him like in the office by some of the people that were my leads, just kind of introducing me to various people amongst the team. We hit it off really well. We played Bloodborne together all the way through.
Oh, dude, Bloodborne.
Yeah, I don't think I would have completed that game solo, but man, I had a blast.
No, you have to have
co-op.
help. At least I did. That was my pandemic game, like 2020. I'd had Bloodborne for like 4 years. I just hadn't played it. And then I was like, you know what? I got nothing to do right now. What a game. Sorry. Anytime someone mentions Bloodborne, I'm like, yes.
You played that with another player co-op?
Yeah, not the whole thing. I did play a decent amount of it solo, but I got to the point, especially with the DLC, I was like, I got to find some people to play this with. And I did. And it was, whew. That was an experience. Those From Software games are just brutal.
They forge your relationships in fire.
Yeah. I just beat Sekiro.
Ah, Sekiro. Yes.
Love Sekiro. And that's all by yourself. That was one of the hardest games I've ever played. I beat the last boss and almost cried. I think I died to him probably 150 times. That's not an exaggeration.
Yeah. I could gush about Sekiro. What a wonderful game. But yeah, we Nate and I formed a really good bond over Bloodborne, and then I was able to feel comfortable reaching out to him and be like, hey, I have aspirations of doing this thing, and I want your advice and your guidance and mentorship. And then for Ben Arnold, he was an engineer that I had a mutual friend at the studio named Victoria House, who I remember one day we were just talking in the common area around lunchtime, and she pulled me over and she's like, hey, I have someone that I want you to meet. And we walked over and sat down on some comfy chairs and was like, this is Ben Arnold. Ben Arnold's a new engineer to the GW2 team, and I feel like y'all will hit it off really well. Talk to each other about the games that you like. Boom, go. And it was just an immediate connection. Like Ben's one of my closest friends. Anytime that we're together and we're talking, we're on the same wavelength, and we can go for hours just talking shop and thinking about like how do we push games further and what are some of the cool things that we can do with the tool set. And Ben was the kind of engineer that he didn't let limitations stop him from dreaming really big. And so for that first project that we ended up shipping, we had a lot of inspiration from Nier Automata, and from Fury, which was coming out around the same time, to take kind of bullet hell style mechanics and translate them into a 3D action game. But then the extra challenge on top of that being this is an online game, and so you have to worry about like the difference in server pings and how do you make sure that the information that's on the server and the client are the same, because they can get desynced, and that's why in online games it can feel like a projectile shouldn't have hit you, but you did see it explode. Like maybe you dodged it, but it was like nope. Technically, the server thought that you got hit. So yeah, but he was the kind of person that was very hungry to solve those problems, and so he instilled in me a lot of the same values of just like don't ever give up at the first sign of resistance, because there's always another way around, and sometimes it just takes some creative thinking.
That's great. You found those guys, and the fact that there's a lot of people that get into the industry and they kind of isolate a little bit. Even if they're like in QA, maybe they just only talk to the QA people. They don't like reach out I don't know if you've noticed this, but something I saw was like they don't reach out to like the departments they want to go to. And they sort of just keep their head down, do their work, but they're not like socializing as much. And for you to be able to advance, I think in your career, you got to be able to talk to people and get to know them. And not that you don't give a shit if you go about it in the opposite way, but it's like they don't know what you are thinking unless you go talk to them.
Yeah, I was having a conversation about this with one of my colleagues, I think last week, where I think communication, especially as we're all working from home now, or a lot of us are, is even more important to try and reach out and connect with your colleagues and to understand what they're thinking and what kind of product that they're looking to make, right? Because by making video games, like a lot of us are artists, even if we're engineers or designers or in QA, like we're looking to make something that elicits an emotion in the viewer and in the player. And if you can reach out to individuals and understand what kind of emotion they're trying to establish, what kind of art they're trying to create, and experience they're trying to develop, it makes it a lot easier to get aligned on like here's the thing that we're actually moving towards, and here's an idea that maybe I have from my expertise that might guide you in the direction that you want. And maybe you have something that from your expertise and your experience, you can come to me and say, you think that this might work, but here are some pitfalls that you might be able to, navigate by doing X, Y, and Z. It's so important to communicate with people and to reach outside of your area of expertise to get those extra perspectives, not just from a social standpoint, to, broaden your friendships and relationships, but also just from a craft standpoint. You're just going to learn so much more. If you didn't want to do that, you could be a solo indie developer, but even indie developers, like they still need to be able to communicate with a team, and I'd argue that that's probably more important for them with a smaller team. Yeah,
because there's so much weight on their shoulders. We had this really cool husband and wife team who are making a game by themselves. I think they hired a narrative designer since we talked to them, but they're making their own game on their, the guy's handling the all the art, she's handling the programming, and it was fascinating watching that dynamic because like there's so much on their shoulders to try and make this game. And yeah, absolutely, I would agree that they would need to have even better communication, even though it's a smaller team, just because they're working on so much. So
yeah, there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah, for sure. So Cameron, let's talk about your work on the Nightmare Fractal Dungeon.
The thing that I was doing before I decided to really put in a lot of effort into the Nightmare Fractal was I had an indie game that I was working on in the background that I had a few friends that I had met through various means that were talented in a variety of different ways. And we came together and we had this idea for a game. And so I was learning Unity at the time and trying to build a little indie project in Unity in my spare time. And I did that for a few months, and I used that as kind of like a first stab at like, let me see what I can do as a designer, right? And there were times where I would bring in my project that I'd been working on into the office and be like, hey, at lunch, I'm going to open up my laptop. Here's a game that I've been working on. Can you play this and give me kind of your initial thoughts on what this might be from a quality standpoint? What are some ways that I can improve? Like, please, I'm hungry for information. And there was a moment where I was thinking about it, and I can't remember exactly who I was talking to at the time, but something that was said clicked with me. It was like, hey, if you're going to spend like 15, 20 hours a week trying to learn Unity to make a side project so that you can prove to this team that you can be a designer, why don't you just use the development tools to do something in that same time in the game that you're going to be working on? And it doesn't have to ship. You can make something that can just, go into the ether. But if you build it in such a way that it could ship, then, you might be better served spending your time doing that. And again, living like 5 minutes away, that was an easy choice for me to make. It was like, do I sit in my bedroom on my computer and learn Unity, which may not be applicable because we use proprietary software, or do I go into the office and actually learn the tools that I would be doing on the job? And so it was a bit of trading something that I would have been doing. And if I were to tell people that I was doing an indie project in Unity in my spare time, it probably wouldn't make people think that I was crunching as much as if I told them I'm staying in the office building something in my free time with the development tools. And I think there's something interesting there, right? Crunch is less of an action and more of a state of mind, right? At least that's kind of how I feel about it.
I think that's really, really interesting. Because that makes a lot of sense. I never thought about it like that, but you're exactly right. Because once you get into that mindset, it's hard to get out of it.
Yeah. And it wasn't a necessity, right? I wasn't burning myself out or anything. It was tough. I was putting in a lot of energy, but I loved doing it.
How tough was it learning the tools? Did you ever get discouraged, or you're like, oh God, I'm so in over my head. What am I doing? I'm never going to finish this. Or was it like, no, I'm getting this. This is my jam. How was it?
No, it was so tough. Yeah. There was, I was having to turn my brain into a different setting for a lot of things. I talked about I didn't like math. The reason why I love math now is because Ben Arnold and I sat down and he was like, here are the cool things you can do with math. I'm going to show you how to build this cool ability, and you do so by doing this, and this, and this. And by the way, that was advanced trigonometry. I'm like, oh, okay, that's not so bad. And also the output is actually interesting to see happen. And that engaged a lot of that curiosity in me and got me going in terms of learning more advanced stuff. But it was really tough. And there were also times where if I had some free time at work, I would start to, especially towards the tail end of my time as QA before I got into design. It was kind of a little bit of a quiet period. So I'd spend some time jumping into the engine and seeing the kind of scripts that our other designers were making, seeing some of the content that they were building, and then trying to figure out how it worked, right? Reverse engineering it, going through and being like, okay, this piece connects to this piece, connects to this piece, and this does this, and blah, blah, blah. And there was one moment where I reached out to somebody and I was like, hey, I'm trying to understand how this system that you built works. I know it works. I'm not coming to you and saying there's a bug, but I also don't know how it's actually doing what it's doing, which makes me think that it might actually be broken but working on the front end. They that was kind of a coarse interaction because they weren't used to QA going into the actual scripts, and it kind of felt to them like I was auditing them.
Right. They took it personally.
Right. Which I totally understand why it happened. In fact, that person and I are really good friends now. And they were one of.
I thought you were about to say you're really big rivals now, really big enemies.
No. They there definitely was a period of time where like I definitely felt some rivalry with that person. But no, we became good friends, and they became a really powerful mentor for me. So it was difficult. There was a lot of challenges. There were a lot of times where I felt like I'm way over my head. I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, I should have gone to school was a thing that I would tell myself so many times. But I had good friends that pushed me and continued to lift me up and encourage me to continue going.
That's great. Yeah, that and learn by doing. It's kind of like experience is the best teacher. The more you do it, the better you're going to get with it if you stick with it. So take me through like your design style. Are you writing a bunch of stuff out and then going into the tools? Or are you just like messing around with the tools? Do you have like a plan, or how do you work? How did you work? Well, actually, the real question should be, how did you work then versus now?
That's a good question. So I start with kind of vision setting. What is the thing from a very high level kind of visual standpoint, kind of ideating on the trailer of the thing that you're thinking about, right? So I want players to fight a dragon that is like 3 times the size of the Empire State Building. And how are they actually going to do that? Because many games, like, they'll have big dragons and, you'll be fighting their toenails. How do I build something that really feels like, an encounter with a beast that is that gargantuan in scale, but you're actually engaging with them, right? Think about that, visualize that, and think about it as if the video game already existed, right? What's the end product that you're going after? What's maybe the mechanics that you can think of, or the way that the character animates and the VFX like come to life and bring this whole idea in your head kind of together. And then from there, it's about taking each of those individual components and being like, okay, well, I know I'm going to need this asset and maybe these animations and these effects, this model, and then that's what I might need for my support teams. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to kind of put that aside, and then I'm going to go into, all right, like, how do I actually build this in the engine? What are some tools that I can use to get the kind of behavior that I'm imagining in my head, and prototype this out, and really push the boundaries of maybe what some of these tools were intentionally built for, and say, well, it does do this thing, and if I tweak it a little bit, it can do this thing in this different way, and that's pretty much close enough to what I need. Do that, experiment around a bunch, and just kind of like find ways of being able to develop a very early, very dirty version of the experience. And then from there, use that as like a presentation, right? Go to the rest of the team and be like, hey, I have this idea. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this idea and tell you what the vision that I have in my head is of what we could do. Here's what I think we might need for it. And here is a representation that I've built with like just myself going in and doing this to really try and get the value of this out, so you have a visual aid to show, here's what I'm thinking of, right? Get people kind of aligned on a central vision, but make sure that it's kind of blurry enough that people can inject their own ideas and thoughts and their vision into it to kind of create, a collaborative effort there. And then you go through the process of like getting in, iterating on something very quickly, seeing what you can do to get that feeling just a little bit more potent. Get people to come in as often as you can to play test the content or play the system that you're developing and tell you how they're feeling. One big thing that I learned that I didn't do a whole lot early, that I am trying to do a lot more now, is when you get people to play your content, to look at your content, tell them nothing, right? Just let them go. Let them do what they need to do. build in, like, if you're going to be prototyping a new system, build in like little signs that tell players, like, hey, press this button to act like you're going to do this thing, and then let them play organically through the experience that you've crafted, because you're going to get the most raw and important feedback out of a blind playthrough, right? And you only get to do that once.
That was something I learned when we were went to SCAD for game design, and that was one of the things we learned when we really started playtesting our senior project. Not to even compare it to what you guys do, but it was like we get up there and start explaining things to people, and it was like a local co-op game, and we start explaining it, and then they're trying to listen to us and play it at the same time, and it was just a disaster. And it was like, you know what, we should just shut up. Because if it's not clear from the game design, then we screwed up and we got to go fix that. But the only way we're really going to know is if we just watch the players. That's the best advice I think you can give any budding designer. Just make your stuff, and when it's play test time, just be quiet, take notes, ask questions at the end, but don't say anything.
And it's one of those things that when you think about it, it's fairly obvious, right? When you play a video game, the person who made the video game is not there to tell you anything, right?
Yeah, but you're so worried about them getting what you did.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, I have to explain this or they're not going to get it. And then it's like, well, if you have to explain it, it's like a bad joke.
Yeah.
If you have to explain the joke kind of sucks.
Exactly. It's, a lot of people like to say that, if you're going to be getting other designers to playtest your thing, then it's okay to talk through it. And I actually disagree. It is okay when you're talking about it from a paper design perspective. If you want to be like, here is the emotion that I'm trying to elicit, here's the experience I'm trying to get out of the player, here's the reasoning behind decision A, B, C, D, and E, that's fine. But when it comes to playtesting the actual in-game experience, let them go free, and try to create a space for them to speak to you or to give you their questions, so that what's on their mind, where information needs to be shored up, where the experience needs to be smoothened out a little bit, but it doesn't interfere with the moment-to-moment gameplay, because the people on the couch playing your game, the people at the computer playing your game, it's going to be seamless. And if anything stops them from enjoying it to the fullest, then that's it, right? That's where they balk.
Right. Yeah. What about collaboration with level design? Do you do any of the level design, or is there another team for that?
So ArenaNet is interesting. We've got map artists who do a lot of level design as part of their job, but they also are in charge of making it all very pretty and putting the environment together from an aesthetic standpoint. But then they work together with map designers who are building the content that goes into those maps. And so it's kind of a collaborative effort between design and art to really nail down what the levels feel like. And with it being an online MMO, a lot of it is it comes down to let's think about the region that we're in. Let's think about the zones and the aesthetics and the biomes that we're going to be seeing, and then here's a brief overview of what kind of things players might be able to do in what areas. Take a first stab at it, right? I've been pushing for more gray box level design to happen by designers, to really show here's the flow that I'm thinking about. Here's the pacing of objectives and of dialogue and of the different gameplay moments that might happen. And one of the first projects that I did that I was able to apply a lot of that gray box mentality to was actually the fight with the big dragon that was 3 times the size of the Empire State Building. We knew that we were only going to be able to see his head and his neck, which was still enormous, but we were trying to figure out how do we make a fight with this dragon where you only see those assets. And that transitioned into, okay, what's going to happen in this big cave? But this cave was made for this purpose, right? Like the people that came before, they set this up so that we could use this technology that they have to take down this dragon by luring him in here. And so it needs to feel authentic, and it needs to feel purposeful. And so I worked together with the map artist at the time, Dan Ebling, to figure out, like, here's the path that I want players to take. Here are the story moments that I want to happen, the pacing of those moments. Here's a section where, like, taking inspiration from games like Uncharted, we want to have a little bit of a chase sequence where, like, things are coming through the walls and, like, a bunch of breakables are
big
happening.
Set piece.
Yeah, but the moment is focused on navigation and nothing else, right? And so we went through and we built that out very, very early, no details or anything. And then we just kind of gradually expanded on that, and we iterated and learned what was working, what didn't. And that was a lot of fun. So it's different depending on what kind of content you're developing, for like an open world map versus like an authored instance experience. It's a little bit more linear. But level design is super important, and I'd love to see more people engaging with it.
That sounds like a really cool collaborative environment where you're really able to work with the artists and bring the vision to life. There might not be a right answer to this question, but when do you know you got it? Like, how many iterations, play tests? It's like, is there something that goes off in your head where, like, okay, we're done, or is it? How does that work?
Whew, that's tough.
Yeah. Like I said, there's probably not one right answer for that. Every design decision is different. Everything you're building is different. But I'm always interested in that from people that do design, because I feel like, you could work on it forever.
You could.
And keep perfecting it, keep tweaking stuff, but eventually you got to let that baby go.
Yeah. The honest answer is I don't think that I've had a moment where I thought, okay, this is good enough. Like, it's good to go for my own content. I'm a perfectionist for my own things. When I've reviewed other people's content, I've absolutely tried to push myself to be like, okay, this is where your fun is at. Like, these are the things that I'm finding the most engaging. Run with that. This extra fluff that you might have, either find a way to recontextualize it to reinforce the experience, or just cut it out entirely. Big fan of the philosophy of design by subtraction, where you just, for an example, Shadow of the Colossus is a game that's entirely built around going after these monolithic creatures, and there's no trash mobs in the game. Like, it's just you, your horse, your bow, and your sword.
Yeah, no collectibles, really.
Yeah, and that's it. And this world, and yeah, they took away everything that could have detracted from that core experience. And that's what I try to really get into the mindset of when I'm reviewing other people's content, is really just, here's what's really fun. For my own content, I struggle with that, and it's something I'm working on every day. To be honest with you, it's less of a moment of this is good enough, and more of a moment of this is where I can get it. This is as high of a quality that I think I might be able to do, and now it's time to just back away from changing all of the mechanics anymore, from iterating on these things, and just polish it. We had in 2020, I had a significant life event happen where I lost my mom, and
sorry.
Yeah, me too. I not to dwell too much on that, but I dove into my work for the remainder of the year, and I was working on a project that I was fortunate enough to be able to. I had a small team at the studio, and we were kind of using that as a way to process our griefs and to really take the feelings that we had from 2020's pandemic starting up, and all of the things that were happening in our personal lives, and really infuse it into the experience that we were developing. And it was one of the projects that I felt the strongest about, making sure that it was the highest quality. And that project, that was the Sunqua Peak Fractal Dungeon, we pushed all the way up into the very last weeks before it would go live. Tweaking mechanics, tweaking some of the skills that the boss was using, changing up some of the details of the environment. And I tried to do so in a way that was conscious of the fact that I have support teams that are, coming in and they're assigning audio values to things. They're making sure the music is lined up. They're making sure that the VFX feel right. QA is coming in and testing and wanting to make sure that all this stuff works. And I was just... I was not in a great place, and so I was like, I'm just going to keep going and keep going and keep going, up to the point of where I think the week before we shipped, I injected an entirely different mechanic into the final phase of the hardest version of the encounter, to really give it that last bit of oomph that I possibly could, and it was super unhealthy. And I don't recommend it to anybody. You're gonna want to pump up the quality of your project by as much as possible, all the way up until the last day. And I ended up, recovering and getting back in there, but it took a lot of mental toll, and so it's really important to be able to practice that discipline of saying this is good enough, right? If there are others out there that have the skill set of being able to clearly see when something is really good, really fun, you found what's great about it, I want to hear about it. I want to hear how you've honed that skill, because it's very difficult whenever you're assessing your own stuff.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure too, given what you were going through, you wanted to keep working on that thing, because it was probably distracting you from, dealing with a lot of stuff that you we're eventually going to have to deal with. I imagine that had to play a part of it too. So
absolutely, 100%. It was an escape.
What do you guys do? This game's been around for a while, decade now, and the franchise has been around a lot longer than that. But what do you guys do to keep it fresh, keep people coming back? I mean, I'm not, just totally full transparency, never played Guild Wars 2, watched a ton of video on it. I'm not a huge MMO fan, but it looks cool. I like there's a lot of differences, especially with the way stories play out. It seems like the story kind of plays out in a way that single player games play out, which is interesting in an MMO type of thing, and branching narratives and whatnot. And it's like you guys are making just a ton of content all the time. Actually looked up when your first project, the Nightmare Dungeon, got announced. I saw you and I think one of your programming mentor were talking about it, and looked at all the comments on YouTube, and people are like, "Man, this is the best. This is my favorite release. This is my favorite dungeon. Love this." So many people in the comment section just gushed over it. I went on Reddit too, found a bunch of people who loved that stuff. So I mean, clearly you guys got a fan base that is really engaged with what you're doing. But I mean, it must be hard still trying to figure out how to keep this game fresh when you've been working on it for so long.
Yeah, it's a challenge. It's a big challenge. So one of the big things that we try to focus on is how do we preserve the things that people have loved about our game over the last decade, right? The kinds of experiences that they look at this game and they say, this is what this game provides. Being able to go out into the world and play alongside huge groups of friends, upwards of 80, 100, 150 other people. Being able to go and tackle content after a 9-year break, coming into the game and feeling like, hey, because we're a horizontal progression game and we don't add a bunch of power increases with every expansion, if you were ready for the end game before, you're most likely ready for the end game now, so you can just jump right into the good stuff. Taking kind of those core philosophies and pillars that we've built the game around, and ensuring that we aren't breaking them, but we might bend them a little bit, right? The same kind of things that you loved doing in terms of going out into the world, exploring, having these dynamic events happen. Can we change the way that we filter them to the player? Can we change how they're organized on the back end and push people back and forth between different periods of time happening in these maps, and saying, like, hey, there are multiple phases to this map, and certain events might happen in this phase and certain events happen in another, and really trying to inject some variety into that. And I worked on encounters for a very long time, and I still do. And one of the things I love about encounters design is that you can take a bunch of mechanics and skills and abilities that players are used to, and you can remix them and switch them around and just give slight variances to them and create an entirely different feeling encounter. You can change small numbers and add small effects here and there to come out with something that feels entirely fresh. And we recently did something similar with the hardest encounter that we had released into the game. It was called Dragon Void Challenge Mode, and that released in June of this year. And a lot of the design philosophy around that was make the mechanics that players already know about, put them together in an environment that demands that players play at their absolute best, and make sure that things are incredibly tightly tuned and timed so that people have to be on the top of their game. They have to be moving and reacting as quickly as they possibly can. The margin for failure is practically zero, right? And in a game like Guild Wars 2, you've got tons and tons of options and abilities that are available to you that you can use for a variety of different combat effects. You have the ability to put down portals and have players like warp around the arena to different spaces. You've got the ability to apply Aegis, which completely blocks the next attack, or stability, which makes it to where if you'd be knocked down or pushed back, that it burns that stability instead. And so with all of these tools that players have at their disposal, this encounter was basically kind of a love letter to the system and saying, we're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink at you. Not all at once, although maybe at the end of the encounter all at once, but we're going to ask you to like really work together as a group and make sure that you've got answers to all of these problems ready. So that when we throw this challenge at you, not only can you move correctly, not only can you communicate to each other correctly, but you can also ensure that your group as a whole has an answer to each of these problems. That is just, it's one of those things where it's simple, but really tuning it for perfection allowed it to feel incredibly exciting, and we watched like a 7-day world first race for that encounter for the first group to finally beat it, and it was just so incredible to see people get really excited about strategizing over that stuff. And there weren't a whole lot of brand new mechanics introduced in that encounter. It was just a lot of things that people have come to know, a lot of mechanics that they've seen in other fights that were all pushed together in different ways. But it achieved what we wanted, which was getting the feeling of the toughest encounter in the game. And I think that kind of philosophy can be applied to GW2 as a whole, right? Take the things that people know have come to love, and just remix them a little bit, change them up, subvert expectations, as weighted as that term is, but really try to make it to where people can't truly expect what's coming next. I think that's going to be really important.
But you're still doing, like, it still sounds like a lot to get right. It's not like you guys are just like hitting the copy paste buttons. Like you guys are putting a lot of time and thought to it, but the foundation that's there is so strong as well. So that certainly must make it a little easier.
The thing that I've found over the last year that's been a really great allegory for me, an in-world allegory, is Legos, right? So, we've all played with Legos as a kid. You've got a bunch of bricks, you put them together. Maybe you get a kit that tells you like how to build, your favorite thing, the Batmobile or something like that. But one of the things that I've fallen in love with over the last year is Lego has these sets that they create out of recycled parts that were made in mass, that there's just too many of them. And they have a team over there that ideates on like, how do we use these different parts that we have way too much of to create something new and unique, but super satisfying and fun. And I actually have an example of that with the Lego Orchid, which is like, it's an orchid. It's beautiful. I have this next to my plants, and I don't have to worry about it falling over and dying like an actual orchid does.
Yeah, you wouldn't know that was fake from the video.
But the fun thing about this is like a lot of these pieces are completely reused, just like old stuff that they've got lying around. Like the little buds are Demogorgon heads from the Stranger Things sets. The centerpiece of each flower is a frog. It's a pink frog that they have on there. Just like really creative use of the resources that they have available, rather than saying, we're going to build an orchid, and so here are all of the brand new, unique, and entirely never before seen parts that we're going to put together. It's just like, can we do this at the same quality bar or even higher, I would say, with a bunch of stuff that we already have. And that's kind of the philosophy of supporting a 10-year-old game, right?
Sure. Well, that's a testament to your entire team, because, man, people still playing this, people still loving this game, man. So hats off to all of you.
Absolutely.
And Cameron, you got a wonderful story, man. Thanks for stopping by and spending some time with us. This was it was inspirational. If you're inspired by this story, I don't know, you might need to get your pulse checked. So, man, thanks so much for sharing this with us. This is great.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me on, Graham.
All right, that's going to wrap up our show for this week. We want to thank Cameron for being our guest. To find out more about Mudstack, head over to mudstack.com, where you can follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and join our community on Discord. And of course, we want to thank you for listening. We'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.